was just like, that's strike two, Mary. Mary, what are you saying? Why are you saying these things? I mean, it's very, very, very racist for her. What's the story, morning glory? What is the word, hummingbird? Thank you so much for joining me again on my channel. This is going to be the review of the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, season 2, episode 12. And I must say, Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, it is giving me everything that every single cell in my body needed. I am loving this franchise. I am loving this season. It is just hands down giving me everything that I need. So we are still in Vail, Colorado. The women were outside. I think they were having s'mores or something. I don't quite remember. I think they were having s'mores. So they were all outside, and at some point Mary didn't want to participate anymore, so she bounced. She left. She went to bed. So Lisa is telling the girls that, about these rumors that are going around about Mary and her church and her being this cult leader and manipulating her church members. And so the women are like, you need to give us more detail because you're talking in riddles, and you're being very vague and very, very ambiguous. And Meredith was like, I'm not going to, go against my friend because, you're just saying all of these really ambiguous things. And, Lisa said, well, Cameron said, and Cameron was a former church member of Mary's church who left the church because he believed that he was being manipulated and that Mary was basically up to no good. So he left the church, and he's, going around to anyone who's willing to listen, talking about how his experience at Mary's church. And so Lisa was like, well, he's been very religiously traumatized, I think she said. And Meredith was like, religiously traumatized? Girl, please. That is so vague. If you're going to if you're going to say things against Mary, you need to come with something better than that. We need more details. We need more facts. So then Lisa just blurts out, he mortgaged his house for $300,000 and gave it to Mary. So that was like, wow. That was a big, wow moment. So Mary and her husband, these are the rumors that Mary and her husband, they basically browbeat their church members into giving them money, and they will put the pressure on them, manipulate them, tell them things about, securing a place in heaven or whatever if they would just give this money. So the church members, they believe Mary. She's their leader. They want to do good. So they end up giving so much of their hard-earned money to Mary's church. And it's basically, and the money doesn't even go to the church or for church purposes. It's basically to sustain and fund Mary and her family's lifestyle. So Lisa says she believes Cameron 100%. She doesn't think that he's lying at all. Now Meredith is like, you know what? I'm not so sure, because Meredith wants to stick by Mary's side. So she's opting to believe Mary over anyone else. Now Lisa in her confessional said that it was very hypocritical of Meredith to doubt her story about Cameron and to require more proof or more evidence about these allegations against Mary. But when it came to Jen Shaw, Meredith was quick to believe any negative thing about Jen Shaw without, requiring, all this hardcore evidence. So then Lisa leaves the group, and she goes to find Mary, and she goes into Mary's room, and she says, you know what, Mary, there's these rumors going on about you and your church and about you being a cult leader. And so I just want to come to you directly and just ask you the questions directly. Do the people at your church believe that you are God? And Mary was like, no, absolutely not. So then Lisa said, well, that's what Whitney's saying. So here, Lisa is completely throwing Whitney under the bus and saying that it's Whitney. She's the one that is bringing up this information in our group, that people are saying that you're this, people think that you're this God and you're this cult leader. So Mary says that if Lisa's really her friend, she would ignore all these rumors and believe her and stand by her side. So 2 weeks prior, we see a conversation that occurred between Jen and Lisa. Jen completely laid it all out about Mary. She said that she has a first cousin who has a friend who said that Mary is a cult leader, who said that Mary's church members, are on food stamps because they give so much of their money to the church. There's people in her church committing suicide. There's people in her church who are in fear of their lives, who are scared to death of Mary. Now, Mary says, well, this is the reason why Jen Shaw is where she's at, clink, clink, and the reason why I'm out here living in freedom. Moving on. So then Mary Mary meets up with Jenny, and she goes into her room, and she says, I just really want to show you that how much I appreciate you or whatever, and I accept your apology. I guess they had kissed and made up, her and Jenny. And she gives Jenny a pair of very expensive Louis Vuitton booties. And Jenny was gracious. She accepted the gift. She said thank you. But then in Mary's confessional, she says, the only reason why I gave her those shoes was I needed to lighten up my luggage. That's the only reason why I gave her those shoes, and I didn't want them anymore. So it's not like she went out and bought these things. She actually just gave Jenny an old pair of shoes that she had. So moving on from that, Whitney and Heather. So Whitney and Heather are talking the next morning. They're sitting in Whitney's bed, and Whitney tells Heather, in the middle of the night, I'm sleeping, and I hear laughter coming through the walls, coming from your room, and I can hear your voice and Lisa and Mary. And she said that it sounded like Mary had given you a gift or something. And Heather says that, yes, in the middle of the night, Lisa and Mary came into her room, woke her up, got on her bed, were bouncing up and down like it was like a slumber party or something. And Mary had given Heather and Lisa some very expensive Louis Vuitton gifts. And so Heather proceeds to tell Whitney that, Lisa told Mary it was you that brought up this whole thing about Mary being a god and people believing that she's a god in her church. And so Mary had also told Lisa and Heather that she was done with Whitney and she wasn't going to be friends with her anymore. So Whitney believes that this is all Lisa's, grand plan to ice out Whitney. So Whitney believes that Lisa had put this in motion to kind of like ostracize her from the group because Lisa and Whitney are having their own issues. Now, Lisa and Whitney's issues, I'm not really clear on what they are, simply because I didn't watch all of season 1, so I don't really understand the history between Lisa and Whitney. So Heather meets with her sister, Nancy. She had been estranged from her sister for quite a while because her sister had left the Mormon church, and this really had hurt Heather. And at that time, Heather was like a hardcore Mormon, and in her mind, if you weren't Mormon, you didn't exist in her world. So she basically had cut off all ties with her sister. Now that Heather herself has left the Mormon church, she wants to reconnect with her sister, and also, their father had passed away. So she meets up with her sister. They have a really good conversation. They talk it all out. The sister admits that, I was kind of jealous of you, Heather, because you were the one that still maintained a close relationship with our father. And, you were still part of the family. So you were living this, life. And I was kind of jealous of you. And the sister said, but I never thought that maybe you could also have been jealous of me because I was free from the Mormon church. I wasn't held down by anyone or anything, living my life, doing what I wanted to do, because that's how Heather is trying to live now. So they reconcile and they decide that, they're going to try to make it work between them. And they plan on having a celebration of their dad's life. Lisa and Meredith and Jenny, they meet and decide that everyone should get together, should have one big meeting, and give Mary an opportunity to give her side of the story. So they decide to have this meeting. Everybody gathers around in the living room. Meredith starts off by saying that she wants to resolve whatever issues the group has, and she wants to stop all the back talking. Not the back talking, but everyone talking behind each other's backs. Now, in Jenny's confessional, she says it's kind of funny that Meredith, denounces talking behind people's back when she's the one that hired a private investigator to go and investigate her friends. So then Meredith apologizes to Mary about the whole Cameron thing. She says, I'm really sorry that I brought up Cameron to Whitney. I should have just gone directly to you or said nothing at all about it. Then Whitney lays it all out for Mary. Whitney's like, girl, let me tell you how it really went down. So she says, this is how it all happened. She said, Lisa was having an event. She invited me and Meredith to her event. And no, she invited Meredith to her event. And she also invited Cameron. At this event, Lisa specifically made it a point to introduce Cameron to Meredith. So when they were introduced, Cameron spilled all the beans about Mary's church to Meredith. Now, when Mary had her cooking class event, Meredith told Whitney all the things that was said to her by Cameron. So that's how it all got started. So Lisa denied bringing, she says, you know what, I had nothing to do with this. I did not bring Cameron into this situation at all whatsoever. Meredith gives Mary an opportunity to speak. She says, Mary, what do you say about all of this? And Mary's like, I don't have to give anybody any kind of explanation. And while she's saying this, she's looking at Whitney and kind of like looking at Whitney crazy. And so Whitney's like, well, why are you singling me out? Why are you looking at me? And Mary says, because I want to. And if I'm not able to speak up for myself, my name should never be brought up. And so Whitney was like, well, Mary, the night before, I tried to give you an opportunity to speak up and you just walked away. I was trying to give you a chance to, to explain or whatever. I was coming directly to you, woman to woman, but you got up and you left. And so Mary rolls her eyes at Whitney and she's like, oh my God, you're just so exhausting. So Heather questions to Mary, like, why are you going so hard on Whitney? Like, what's the deal? And so Mary says, well, you know what? You didn't do anything when she came hard at me. Why are you defending her now? Why are you protecting her? Because when she came and attacked me, you didn't do anything. And Heather's like, what are you talking about? And so Mary says, at the cooking class, she was yelling at me across the table, and she's referring to about how she was trying to call Whitney. Whitney didn't answer her phone because she was trying to invite Whitney into the cooking class, and Whitney was like, I was carpooling kids, and she was referring to that. So Whitney says that okay. And so then Whitney says, you know what? Lisa saw a crack in my relationship with you, Mary, and she took the opportunity to manipulate you and then weaponize you against me. And Mary was like, can't nobody manipulate me. And so then Lisa says, well, she tries to defend herself. She's like, I wouldn't do that. And I don't know why you're accusing me of doing that. Like, I've got this power, this mind control over people to make them do my bidding. I'm not like that. So while she's, yelling and screaming, Mary is like, Lisa, shh. And Lisa actually obeyed and was quiet. And I was like, well, so much for Mary trying to deny that she manipulates people and she's like this cult leader and can, convince people to do her bidding, because at that moment she was like, psh, 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 Lisa, be quiet. And Lisa got quiet immediately. She was very obedient. And so Heather says that, Heather announces that, Mary, you came into the room, you gave me these very expensive Louis Vuitton, whatever. And Mary was like, that's nobody's business. Why are you bringing that up? That's nobody's business. And so then all the women got very expensive designer gifts from Mary. They got gifts that were like between $2,000 to $5,000, except for Whitney. And Whitney was like, you know what? I don't care that you gave everybody a gift except me. What I'm hurt is the fact that we don't have a friendship anymore. I'm hurt by us losing our friendship. So then Mary says, well, when thinking about Jen, okay, so yeah, she says, I'm really hurt about us, not being friends anymore. And, okay, and so Mary said that, Whitney talked behind her back. She's like, you hurt me first because you were talking behind my back. And Whitney said, I've never, ever talked behind your back. In fact, the only time that I said anything about you was last night when we were all talking about you. It wasn't just me. It was everybody. We were talking about you. And then Heather mentioned something about Jen. And then Mary was like, don't compare me to Jen. Jen's like, that's criminal status. Don't compare me to Jen. So they talk about manipulation. And then Mary says, I could have been manipulated. I could have manipulated you already at the cooking class. And Heather is like, what are you talking about at the cooking class? Heather is like, I don't even know. I don't remember what happened in the cooking class because I was so full of wine. And then Mary says, you're always full of wine. Someone is always driving you home because you're always drunk somewhere. And then Heather got really offended by that. And she gets up and she leaves. And in her confessional, she says, I've let Mary slide on so many things. I don't say anything about her marrying her step-grandfather. I don't say anything about the horrible things that she's done to people, but she's going to pin me to the cross because I like to be drunk whenever I'm around her because, I have to be drunk because I can't handle her. So Heather leaves because she says, y'all are not being honest. Y'all haven't changed. And so she leaves the group. She takes off. So then Whitney goes off to go find Heather. Heather's crying in the bathroom. And Whitney and Heather decide, you know what, we're just going to leave. We're not going to stay here. So then the women are still the other women, they're still sitting in the living room. And then Jenny speaks up and says, Mary, let me tell you something. And, Mary perks up and she's listening. And Jenny says, everybody last night was talking about you and your church. It wasn't just Whitney or just Heather. It was everybody. They were all talking about you, about your church. And so Mary just becomes undone. She stands up, she's crying. She says, I've never ripped anybody off. I was born into money. I don't need to take money from anybody. And I was born into wealth. And it was a huge responsibility for me to take over this church when I was very, very young. And I've had a lot on my shoulders, so on and so forth. And she goes, and then for Heather, she's doing all that yelling and she with her chubby self. And I was like, uh-oh, that was strike one for Mary. So then Mary tells Lisa that she's been attacked her whole entire life. And then she says, I hate it when people compare me to Jen, because when I look at Jen, this is what she says, and I'm quoting, when I look at Jen, I see a thug, like those Mexican people who deal drugs. I think she's trying to think of the word cartel, and I don't think cartel is anything specific to any particular culture or race, but this is what she said. She says, when I think about Jen, I see a thug, like those Mexican people who deal drugs. And I was just like, that's strike two, Mary. Mary, what are you saying? Why are you saying these things? I mean, it's very, very, very racist for her to say these things. I mean, can you imagine if someone who was not black, so whenever I think about, people robbing people, whenever I think about so-and-so, I think about black people, robbing people. Mary. No, ma'am. No, that's not acceptable. And unfortunately, there's nobody to hold her to the fire. So then Mary says, Heather, if you were trying, so she finds Heather. Everybody's like trying to pack their bags and leave and everything. And so Mary runs into Heather and says, Heather, if you're really trying to be my real friend, this never would have happened. And Heather was like, you know what, Mary, I'm really sorry that I hurt you. And Mary was like, you know what, you're a liar. So Mary, Meredith, Lisa, Jenny, they all leave on Mary's private jet. And Heather and Whitney, they end up flying commercial. So that is the end of that. So this is so good, so juicy. I'm so late to get back to work. And then, I don't know. Mary, okay, I think that there is some shady business going on with Mary's church. Very shady business going on with that church, because her lifestyle and the size of that church doesn't match. Now, maybe, I don't know what her husband does for a living. Maybe she has other streams of income. Maybe she's still living off of an inheritance. But for her to just be giving away gifts that are like $2,000 to $5,000 just willy-nilly like that, the size of the church and her lifestyle, to me, it really doesn't match. And then the things that she said are extremely problematic, referring to Heather as chubby, talking about the cartel thing. Awful, just awful. So anyway, that is my review of the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. Thank you so much for joining me. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will definitely talk to you later.